Good evening all, and welcome. Basements can be creepy places indeed. They may hide terrible and dark secrets, and may be the home of creepy, spooky things, as you are about to find out. Don't forget about the ongoing competition, still nearly at that 3,000 on Twitter and Instagram, so be sure to follow me over there, and prizes will be coming soon. So for now, get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This occurred to my brother. My house was built in 1904. It's a single-family home, wood frame setting on a concrete block foundation. I have been living here for 18 years. All of the weird things that my siblings and me have seen or heard in this house, this one event is the most vivid. About 15 years ago, my brother and his best friends had started a garage band playing mostly Spanish rock, alternative music, but in Spanish. His friends could only get together on Sunday afternoons. They would practice in the evenings, and they would usually call it quits by 8 p.m. This was the time I usually showed up and went to bed, because I worked the graveyard shift. I usually slept for a few hours before heading to work. This event happened in the late fall, so the days were getting shorter, and they had just finished a long session when the decision to head to someone else's house came about. My brother handed his car keys to his buddy so they could load up the equipment everyone had filed out of the basement. The tricky part was that they needed to walk all the way to the back of the basement, up the back stairs, through the kitchen, down the hall into the living room, and out into the front door, where there was a porch. Everyone was outside sitting in my brother's truck waiting for him. My brother was walking up the back stairs when he remembered that he had left some food in a container sitting on a speaker in the basement. He made the decision to go back for it. Now the basement is not clean. With 4 sight lines, there had been partitions made, and the boiler and the main heating unit are right smack bang in the middle. So after my brother walks back, he's about to retrieve his food container, when out of the corner of his eye he sees it. It's a shadowy figure right at his peripheral vision. This feeling of dread and uneasiness washed over my brother. We had been taught that if you are in the presence of a spirit or ghost and you feel a bad vibe, to say a quick prayer, or to cuss at it. My brother chose the latter and said, "I don't have time for this." My brother turns around, not glancing into the dark corner. He starts to walk off to the back of the basement and briskly up the stairs, closing the door and turning off the lights as he leaves, with the last light switch on the opposite side of the front door. Luckily, the door was open, and the light from the street lamp was flooding the living room with its amber light. My brother said he felt someone at his back as he walked out the house, but at no point did he turn around as he flicked the last switch in the living room, and it went dark along with the rest of the house. As he stepped out, he pulled on the door, closing it behind him, still holding his food container in one hand, and jogged down the few porch steps and walks towards the front gate. Our house resides far from the main street, essentially having a large front yard but no rear garage. As he closed the gap between himself and his friend's truck, he kind of smiled and thought things over in his head, mad at himself for spooking out when there was no reason. He climbed into the driver's side of the truck, putting his seatbelt on and getting ready to pull out of the parking spot directly in front of the house, when one of his friends asks, "Hey, wait, what about your brother? Isn't he coming with us?" "What do you mean?" "He went to work early tonight. He's already gone. Did you see his car anywhere?" They all stared at him in disbelief and asked, "So then, Who was walking behind you when you were leaving the house? During high school, my bedroom was in the basement. It was a finished basement, probably done in the 80s. My bed was near the bottom of the stairs. The floor was cheap linoleum on concrete. My parents were away for the weekend, so I had the house to myself. I was responsible, no big deal. They left me $40 for food. Anyway, I shoot out of bed after hearing a metal crash. It sounded like someone was coming down the stairs fast, tripped, and dropped whatever they were carrying. I'm sitting upright in the dark, trying not to move and listening for any sign of who it is. My first thought is, did someone break in upstairs and try to carry everything down and through the garage? 20 seconds go by, but it feels like an hour. I can't hear anything, so I get up and turn on the light. I am astounded by what is in front of me. I can't acknowledge it. It's in my head. It's not real until I say it out loud. I whisper, "Spoons?" Dozens of spoons, forks, knives. My brain can't process this at 3 a.m. I'm standing there swaying, staggering, dumbfounded that at my feet are utensils. It took me a good 5 minutes to finally figure out that a box of old silverware had somehow shifted in the storage above the stairs. It fell down and tumbled down the stairs, spilling its contents all the way down. Strangest sound in the middle of the night, and definitely the strangest thing I've ever had to wake up to. Before I share my mum's experience, I feel like a little bit of background is necessary for you to understand, as my family's history is important. We are from a small town in Arizona. I was born there, but I've lived in the city since I was 5. My parents were born and raised there, as were their parents. The town has a slew of paranormal activity, maybe having something to do with it being known as an outpost of some sort for Spanish soldiers during the war. I honestly don't know which one, but it was several hundred years ago. There are rumors of witchcraft and many witches living there even to this day. It has a cemetery on a hill that is so old it has been condemned. You can literally fall through the ground and through an old coffin if you venture there, and the graves are so old that all the remains are piles of rocks. There are no markers of any kind except for a few splintered, rotted wooden crosses. The house that my great-grandparents lived in was built somewhere in the mid-1800s. My mum grew up in the house, right next door. Many relics from the war have been discovered in this town, and when my mum was a preteen, she says her neighbours who were extremely poor, as they had dirt floors and always wore tattered clothing, discovered a chest of Spanish coins, both gold and silver, while digging a new septic tank. They became very wealthy overnight and moved away. But according to my mum, the family is still very well off. My family had somewhat of a dark history on my mum's side, and after her grandparents both died, her mum was cleaning out their house and discovered 2 voodoo doll type things that they believed were responsible for her parents, my mum's great-grandparents' death. I'm just trying to give you a little bit of background info. My mum has also always been ultra-sensitive. Her intuition is almost always spot on, and she has spent her life hearing and seeing apparitions and spirits from a young age, and also has dreamt of all sorts. Some of them about people who have already passed, some predicting deaths, and other significant events in her life. She passed on some of these traits to me, and she says I am also sensitive based on some of my dreams and experiences. She's told me several times of a dream she has while spending the night at her grandparents' home. She said that there was nothing significant about that day or night that she can remember. She was about 13 years old at the time. She went to bed around 9, which was normal, after helping cleaning up the kitchen, where she stayed and slept in the guest bedroom. And since all her aunts moved away and had their own families, She was alone in the room. The dream started as if she had just woken up in a strange place. She said that immediately a pungent, musty smell hit her nostrils, and it was so dark she could hardly see her hand in front of her. When she lifted her hand to look at it, she heard the sound of a chain rattle and felt something cold and heavy on both wrists. After feeling them, she realized they were thick shackles, and they were attached to the wall behind her, so her movement was limited. She started to feel the rest of her body, and she said she didn't feel like herself. She was extremely thin. She could feel her ribs sticking out, and she wasn't wearing any clothes. Her hair was cut very short and uneven from what she could feel, and her face felt very thin as well. Her cheekbones were also sticking out. She noticed that she could faintly hear the sound of men's voices and the sound of horses, but it was far from where she was. It smelt dank and faintly like horse manure, and the floor she was sitting on was dirt. The wall felt hard, like clay or some type of concrete. She started telling herself this, that she was just dreaming, but she couldn't escape how real it felt. The smell, the sounds, the weight of the shackles and chains. About the time she started to hear the other chains rattling nearby, as if there were others that were chained up as well. She could hear them whimper and cry, but no one near her used any words. At that point, a feeling of complete terror and dread hit her, like she knew she would never escape or be rescued, and she would perish there. She started to look around, and she said she couldn't see anything besides or in front of her, but when she looked up, all she could see was a small window or opening about 2 feet by 2 feet, and it had 4 to 5 vertical bars on it. It must have been at least 50 feet up from the floor, so there was no way she could reach it or look out of it. She realized that's where the voices and the sounds of horses were coming from. She started to panic and pulled the chains, tugged at the shackles, but to no avail. Neither would budge. She was trapped, and there was no way out. At that point, she had told herself she had been dreaming and tried everything she could think of to wake herself up. She bit herself on the hand, pinched herself, and even slapped herself, but nothing would wake her up. After what felt like hours of this, she resorted to just bawl her head off and laid down crying herself to sleep. She woke up in the bed that she had fallen asleep in, which was at her grandparents' house. When she opened her eyes, her cheeks and pillows were wet with tears, and her heart was pounding in her chest. She said she felt that horrible panic and fear for several minutes, until she realized she was awake and in the room she fell asleep in. She immediately got up and went to her grandparents' room. It was early, but they were already awake. She proceeded to tell them everything about the dream in detail. Her grandpa, who she was very close to, hugged and comforted her, reassuring her that she had just had a nightmare, that everything was okay, and she just had a vivid imagination. When she went home later and told her mum, she told her the same thing, that it was her imagination. It took her a few days to get over it, but eventually she forgot about the dream and didn't think about it again until several years later. As I mentioned to you before, my great-grandparents' house that they lived and died in was really old. Growing up, it was always in need of some kind of repair. The roof and the walls were always being worked on. My mum said she was pregnant with me, so she was about 22 when the floor needed to be redone. And it was no easy job. The entire floor required to be torn out. By this time, both of her grandparents had already passed. Her parents lived in the house. My uncle and a couple of cousins were skilled carpenters, so they decided to do the job. My grandparents and my 2 uncles had to move out for about a week in order for the repairs to be completed. This is the part that freaks me out to this day. My grandma said the floor had never been redone up to that point, so she didn't know when the original floor was made. What they found has remained an open family secret for 40 years, but to this day no one speaks of it. When the floor was completely torn out, my uncle expected to find dirt underneath it. Instead, it looked like a boarded up cellar. It was empty, but there was an opening in the corner that resembled a shaft of some sort. The cellar floor was made of some type of old wood and was rotted, so they decided to tear it out as well. There wasn't dirt under that floor either, but another room. It was said that there were 4 floors underneath in total, all of them pretty much empty, besides some old saddles and horseshoes, and some old wine bottles and that sort of thing. But on the very last level, deep underground, there was a room with a dirt floor, with shackles on the walls, and some skeletons still bound by the shackles. There were actual bodies underneath the house. According to my mum, my uncles and cousins got pretty spooked, and they ended up covering everything. The bodies are still there. They didn't want to disturb them. They built a new floor, and no one talks about it anymore. When word reached my mum of what had been found, she immediately remembered her dream. She now knew that she had experienced something that really happened a long time ago. So I guess it wasn't really a dream, more like a glimpse of the past or some sort of time travel. She always cries when she talks about it. As for the house, it's still there and was occupied by my grandma till she passed away back in 2014. The property still belongs to the family, but the house has been condemned. The roof caved in a few years ago. All I know, if it ever leaves the family and is sold, someone is in for a real surprise should they decide to tear it down. So that's my mum's story. I hope you enjoyed. All of this started about 7 years ago. I was going to college and renting my uncle's basement, and on weekends I would usually drive home to my mum's house, which was about 40 minutes away. The first night that something strange happened, I was at my mum's house on a Thursday night after I got off work. I got to her place around 10:15 and went to my old room and started watching Netflix with my headphones on. I didn't have it too loud because my sister, who was in high school at the time, still had her room light on and occasionally would knock and ask me a question on her homework. The night was rather uneventful, and I decided to call in tonight and text her to wish her good night. I didn't get a reply, which made sense considering it was already past midnight, and she had to get up early to go help her grandma with something. I fell asleep shortly after. It was a nice, deep sleep. Suddenly I woke up to the feeling of someone getting up out of my bed. In my tiredness, my first thought was that it was Jill needing to get up for something in the night. As I reached out to touch what I thought was her hand, to clarify Jill was my girlfriend at the time, it was at that moment that I realized this was not Jill. This was a lot taller than her, and when it turned around it was a figure dressed in all black. Every time I've seen this figure, no matter the amount of light, the only thing that would hit it would be enough light to slightly outline the clothing, which was an old-timey suit with a long overcoat. The head was the same, with only enough light to barely make out the features, aside from a very obvious smile and eyes which held a very slight greenish tint, as if pale green light was shining gently into the eyes. Now, at this point, as soon as it looked at me, an intense feeling of fear washed over me, and, no lie, I started to cry. I had seen a good deal of things and nothing compared to that feeling. I started scrambling for my phone to shine a light on it, and as soon as I got my screen lit up and shined it in the direction of the figure, it was gone. Instead of turning on a light after that, I kept tapping the screen to keep it bright until I fell back asleep. I wasn't asleep for long. I woke up again with that same intense feeling. I looked to where the figure had been the first time, and there it was again, just standing and smiling. I grabbed my phone again and shined a light at it, but it was gone once more. This happened a number of times before I took up my laptop, adjusted the settings to keep the screen on, and then popped it up to shine on the area I had seen the figure. and I fell asleep with no issues for the rest of the night. The next sighting was around 1 week later. I was watching Netflix this time as usual, and I heard my sister get up and walk into the kitchen and then come back, and I heard the lights click, meaning that she was finally going to bed. The time was around 11:45. Just outside my old room, to the immediate right, was the door to the bathroom, which had a nightlight to see when you woke up in the middle of the night, and the walls aren't super heavy duty, so when someone closes a door, the wall can shake if they don't close it nicely. That'll come into place soon. The way my bed and dresser were situated, my door was to the right, and I was tucked into the corner of my wall and dresser, so I had a backrest. With my laptop on my lap watching a show, I noticed out of the corner of my eye my door slowly open. I look expecting to see my sister, but as soon as I turned to look, the door slammed, shaking the wall I was leaning on. About half a second went by before that intense feeling of terror and dread came back, and I look up to find this phantom standing there smiling at me. As soon as I recognized it, I turned my laptop around and it was gone. Not wanting to deal with it again, turned Netflix off and called it a night. Now this is where activity really picks up. My weekends end and it's Sunday night, and I'm heading back to my uncle's so I can drop off stuff and head to work. I get back from work and play some video games for a few hours before going to bed at about 1 to 1:30. I was in a light sleep and at about 2:30 I woke up to the sound of whispering. The way I had the basement set up, I had my bed on the opposite end of the windows facing the street, and I had a couple of bookshelves at the foot of my bed behind the TV to kind of separate the rest of the room from my bed. On the opposite side of the bookshelves there's a couch to the left that I can still see from my bed, and the door to go to the hallway to the garage and the stairs to go up. I wake up from the whispering and start listening harder, thinking my uncle was still awake upstairs and on the phone or something. That's when I saw a head pop up over the bookshelves and look at me. As soon as I saw it, it popped back down for a handful of seconds before coming back up. I recognized it as the phantom and turned on the light over my bed, and it was gone. I turn on a movie on my TV and get comfortable enough to turn the light off, and eventually I drift back off to sleep. The movie ends and enough time passes that the TV and DVD player go to sleep mode. Again I wake up to the sound of whispering, and I quickly look around to find the phantom sitting on the arm of the couch, just staring and smiling. That intense feeling comes over me again, and for what felt like 10 to 15 minutes we just looked at each other. And eventually, the phantom got up and walked out the door to the hallway. I fell back asleep for the rest of the night, with no issue. The very next night, the same thing happened again, but the only new thing was the sound of the phantom dragging something heavy across the floor, which to this day, I cannot figure out what it was, unless it was moving the chairs and then moving them back. The events of those 2 nights became a commonplace thing for the next few months. By now, it was getting into late summer, and I was riding my motorcycle as much as I could until I had to park it due to the bad weather. I always had a spot on the end of my bookshelf for my keys and wallet. Every day, that is the spot they would end up, never anywhere else. I had Thursday off that day for some reason, so I was taking my time to prepare myself for the ride down to my mum's and then stop out at Jill's and see her and her parents for a bit. Earlier in the year, I had traded my old bike for a 2012 Ninja 650R, and I was excited to take it down. I go grab my key after putting my wallet in my jacket pocket, and I can't find it anywhere. I grabbed the spare and put it in my jacket just in case, and started checking my old pants. Nothing. I check under a pile of clean clothes I had yet to fold. Nothing. I check my car. Nothing. No nice regular keys anywhere. So I figure I'll look later, and I go down for the weekend and make note to everyone to please keep an eye out for it, because I can't find it. I go back to my uncle's not having found the key, and I kind of forget about it. Events with the Phantom go on as usual for about 3 weeks. I head back down to my mum's, and I make a stop on Friday out at Jill's because she was off school. I get there and I help her do a laundry that's needed to be done, and we reach the bottom of an old pile. And lo and behold, there's my key. I don't know how it could have got there. Things go on as usual, and fast forward about another 4 months, Jill is taking the semester off school and gets a job at a place near where I live, so she starts staying a few nights at my uncle's with me. One night she's off work and watching a movie sitting on my bed when she told me she had noticed a shadowy figure pacing by the windows on the opposite side of the room. Now at this point, I had yet to tell her about the Phantom because I didn't want to freak her out or think I'm crazy. A few weeks go by, and randomly in the middle of the night she wakes up saying she's sorry. I asked her what she was sorry for, and she replied by saying that she's sorry that she kicked me. Me being tired, I responded saying it was okay, and she had asked to trade sides of the bed because she seemed to be a bit scared of something. I'd fall asleep for about an hour before I roll and kick something at the foot of the bed fairly hard. I knew it wasn't her because there was absolutely no give to what I had kicked. I quickly turned the light on above my bed, and we both look at the spot we had kicked, and the comforter was compressed and slowly rising as if whatever was sitting there had just gotten up. We both look at each other and decide to leave the light on and turn on a movie for the night. Some time goes by, and from a local restaurant my uncle got a Valentine's Day balloon that he then gave me, so I took it downstairs and let it go to the ceiling. A few nights go by, and it's just the usual Phantom antics, and I was thankful it didn't wake Jill up at all. Then another night when I was at work, and Jill was still at my uncle's watching movies with the light off work. There was a video of this on my old phone that she sent me, but when I recently checked the SD card, it got corrupted, so I lost the video. She was sitting on the bed when all of a sudden the balloon started bobbing up and down, making circles. It then bobbed and drifted over to where the Phantom usually sat on the arm of the couch, and circled there for a few minutes before moving to the foot of the bed where it had been sitting and started bobbing and circling for nearly 5 minutes before bobbing back to where the balloon started and not moving at all after that. I looked at the video on my break at work and called her to calm her down, and then when I got home I popped the balloon and threw it away. Again, the usual deal with the Phantom's antics for a few weeks before Jill and I were watching a movie. She was sitting up eating fruits by the foot of the bed, and I was half laying against her holding her hands across her stomach. She has poor circulation, so her hands are always cold, and I didn't think much of it. Now, just a fun fact, she usually eats fruit with 2 hands. Out of nowhere I feel the hand with fingers interlaced grab my hand incredibly tight and jerk away. I look up in anger at her, but then I see her holding her fruit with both her hands. All she said was, "What?" with a very confused tone. I told her it wasn't nice to squeeze my hand and then jerk it away. After that she gave me a very confused look, just wiggled her hand, saying that they had been there the whole time and she wasn't holding my hand. Thoroughly creeped out by this, we turned on all the lights and a movie before eventually falling to sleep. As more time went by, Jill returned to school full time and went back to live at her parents' house. I was still at my uncle's, working on what would be my last semester at school. Usually, things with the Phantom went by and nothing too more out of the ordinary happened. His visits were a nightly basis, and the new year came, and then it was April, and I decided to change schools and left my uncle's and moved into a portion of Jill's parents' house that we rented from them. It was at this point which my run-ins with the Phantom started to slow down a little bit, and I wasn't seeing him as close as I had seen before. Out of where they lived, there's a lot of old native Indian burial mounds and some in crop fields that are no longer there, but that's a different story. Anyway, that winter my best friend was down at his parents' house for winter break, and his parents were having their house depraised, so he just wanted to stay out of the way, so we stayed at my mum's and hung out and played video games for 4 days. On the second night in, at last, before a long break of runnings with the Phantom, I gave my best friend the guest room, and I took the floor of the living room in the basement. I used a ton of blankets and built a sort of nest, so it was nice and comfortable. The way I was positioned at the head, there was a love seat that acted as a partition in the basement from workout equipment and the living room. To my left was a regular couch. At my feet was the TV, and behind the wall behind the TV was the guest room. The door to the guest room was just of the TV, and to the right of that was a small L-shaped hallway that went to the same direction as walking into the door to a small bathroom. I woke up in the night at 1:08 after not having been asleep for long. I check the time, then look around and look towards the hall, where I see the Phantom standing in the hall, peeking around the corner. We look at each other, and then the Phantom slowly walks down the half further and disappears into the dark. I fall back asleep, only to wake up again, this time 3 minutes later. The Phantom was squatting at the corner of my nest, just to the right of my feet. I whispered to him to please go away and leave me be. His smile got wider. He stood up and walked back to the dark. Eventually, I fell back asleep and woke up again at 4:08. This time I'm lying on my back, and on all fours over the top of me is the Phantom. His face 2 inches from mine, same slight green tint in his eyes, and a massive smile on his face. It felt like forever, but was really probably a minute, if that. Finally, he slowly got up and walked back to the hall, and before he disappeared, he turned back around and smiled again. And just like that, he was gone. At that point, he was gone for a few years. I thought there were maybe a few times where I saw him, but I was never 100% sure. Every time after that, when I had to go into my mum's basement, I would always get that same intense feeling, along with the feeling of being watched, but never saw him. Now we get to the part that was probably a bit dumb on my part. I was down in the basement for something, and I had this intense feeling before I finally said, "Alright, fine then, let's go." Just kind of asking it to follow me again, which kind of half worked at that point. On occasions I did start seeing the Phantom once more, but always from far away. Since then, I'm no longer with Jill, and I now rent an old farmhouse just outside the town where I grew up. Fast forward about 2 weeks. I got on the subject of skinwalkers with my mum, and it reminded me of the Phantom, and I was telling her about the stories too, just because it had been a while. I kind of thought it was odd that even though I had told the Phantom to come along, that it never got too close, and I ended up telling my mum that. Even she had told me every now and then she would have an odd feeling when she was in the basement alone, late at night mostly. This kind of creeped me out, but I didn't think too much of it and eventually went home and relaxed, watched The Office with my dad. I moved him out there to keep an eye on him, being he has early onset Alzheimer's. No incidents that night at all. Now, this past Thursday, it was about 10:30. Things in the house were nice and quiet, and I was playing some Minecraft with my current girlfriend, using the phone to talk because that seems to work better for some reason. I had the volume off, just enjoying the quiet, and neither of us were chatting when I heard a man's voice outside yell, "Hey." It sounded like he was trying to get someone's attention. I, at first, thought it could be my landlord coming over to check on the house and close up the barn for the night, but I remember he came over in his buggy a few hours earlier, and it was far too late for him to show up. Thinking someone's out there messing with the horses, I grabbed my super bright light and one of my carry pistols and put on my shoes to walk out. I'm enough out of town that the only close house is my landlord's, and then no one else for quite a ways. I flip on the light to the entry and walk out. As soon as I got outside, I noticed that everything is pitch black. All of a sudden, I get an intense feeling of dread. I shine my light all over looking for something. As I was around my truck, I head towards the barn and the horse pasture, where I heard the voice coming from. At this point, I have my trusty EDC out. I'm ready to rock and roll. I shine in the horse pasture, which is fairly flat, and I don't see anything. I don't even see the horse, which means she was probably in the barn or out in the lower pasture. I shine my light into some bushes and a tree between the house and fence. That's where I saw a shadowy figure nonchalantly walk from a bush to behind a tree. With that, I kept the light there for another moment before getting that intense feeling of dread wash over me again. So I head back to check on my dad, and inside all is well. I quickly lock the doors, draw closed all the blinds, and text my friend who lives in town that I may have someone outside my house. By this point in my life, I've seen enough normal things and never been so scared to the point where I don't even make a sound and just turn and rush back inside the house. My friend says to let me know if I want him to come out and drive by and shine a light around the road and see if anything pops up, and then walk around and look so I'm not alone out there in case it is something. I told him I locked the doors and closed the blinds, to which we agreed that's probably good enough for now. I stay up for about another hour or so before deciding to return to bed. As I sat there calming down, I was trying to think of who could have yelled. I thought maybe the landlord walked over and didn't turn on any lights to disturb me, and he was further in the barn, where I couldn't see, and maybe he was trying to get one of the horses' attention. As soon as I start to think that it was probably the answer, I got that exact same feeling from when I saw the phantom, and I knew it was him again. I finally get up and go to bed. There's a window in my room that faces right to the tree where I saw the phantom walk to. Not wanting to be convinced it was him, even still, I got a surge of adrenaline and quickly rushed over and closed the blinds and situated it better so when he went outside couldn't see in. My whole body was on high alert till about 3 a.m. when I finally fell asleep. I woke up around 10:30 just straight exhausted and took it easy. I had my usual day off and relaxed. Now that Friday night it wasn't too late in the evening, but I got home from working out with my best friend and took a shower and got cleaned up before heading to my girlfriend's. In my bathroom there's a clock that's been dead since I moved in. I'm not sure why, I just never put batteries in it, and I just kept forgetting to do so. The clock had always read 9:07, because growing up whenever I took a shower, I would always check the time, and instinctively I would always check the clock even though it always read 9:07. Well, that night it was different. I got out the shower and the clock said 12 exactly. That brings me to just now. I was trying to think of how far this goes back when I was telling my girlfriend about it, and it reminded me of a recurring dream I always had when I was 8. Whenever I would stay at my dad's apartment he had at the time, I would wake up and under my desk I would always see a face staring at me and smiling. So the first possible sighting would have been 17 years ago, but of that part I'm not sure, as it was so long ago. If anyone has any idea what this phantom could be, please comment and share. Over the years, I've talked to my great aunt, who's very in tune with the spirits, and everything I've told her, she says that it could be a very bad and very powerful entity, possibly demonic. She said the key factors are the eyes, that it's tangible, and that it appears to more than just me, and the feeling it gave, to which I noticed. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's stories. That one about the skeletons on the hidden basement levels, damn, that was a really cool twist. I honestly was not expecting that. I really enjoyed these stories. I hope you did too. As always, a huge thank you to my wonderful patrons whose names are on screen. By donating as little as $1 a month, you can get your name on screen. And with a little bit more, you can get other awesome perks. All that information is in the description if you are so inclined. Thanks, guys. Alright then, well, don't forget to drop a like, comment, all the usual stuff. If you have a story of something spooky or scary that has happened to you, be sure to let me know. The info on how to do it is in the description too, my Reddit link or my email address. So thank you everyone. But for now, it's time for me to leave. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.